This is the case study presentation video of the energy group in the 494 course. This video will discuss whether nuclear energy can help Turkey's or world's targets for clean energy production, or whether we should opt towards renewable energy options. Our team is composed of Ece and Abdurrahman, who are against nuclear energy generation, and Mehmet and Omar, who support nuclear energy generation. The topics this presentation will go over include disadvantages and advantages of nuclear energy, social aspects, and future of nuclear energy generation. Let's start with disadvantages of nuclear energy. Abdurrahman will start by nuclear weapons proliferation.
Now, even though nuclear weapons and nuclear energy are two different levels of nucleus enrichment, and they are pretty much different in many aspects, they are still based on the same technology, and they has been always intimately connected to each other. Actually, it's almost impossible to develop weapons or nuclear weapons without the access to nuclear reactor technology, which is the technology that's used for nuclear energy production. In fact, Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty was signed in 1970 that serves the purpose of spreading nuclear reactor technology without utilizing it on nuclear weapons. But it does not seem that treaty was successful. Just after or within 40 years after the signing of this treaty, 5 countries have been able to develop their nuclear weapons with the help of this nuclear technology or nuclear reactor technology. And now, after knowing this, the question that should be asked then is, how can we guarantee that this technology will not fall into the wrong hands? How can we make sure that disasters such as Hiroshima will not be repeated? Let's move on to the second disadvantage of nuclear energy. Now, as you probably might know, uranium is the most used, or it's pretty much the only used element in nuclear plants for nuclear energy generation. The question of the quantity or how much uranium we have nowadays should then be considered in this case. And to answer that, if we follow with the same utilization rate that we are applying in nuclear plants nowadays, we only have 230 years of uranium available for that purpose. This should then be also considered when we are talking about whether nuclear energy is a renewable source or not, because when we compare it to infinite sources or resources such as solar or wind, this seems to be much less or much lower than compared to these other renewable sources. So let's move on to what I believe it to be the biggest drawback of nuclear energy, and that is nuclear waste disposal. Now, as we said before, uranium is being utilized in nuclear power plants, and that is being done in the form of uranium fuel rods in nuclear reactors. Now, after 6 to 8 years of utilization of these fuel rods, they will have released enough of their energy that they are no longer useful in these in the nuclear reactors. But that does not mean that they are done emitting energy. Actually, these fuel rods will remain radioactive enough to release a lethal dose for tens or for hundreds of thousands of years, even after the removal from the bioreactor. So the question of dealing with them should be of major concern, or how should we handle these fuel rods. Now, unfortunately, none of the nuclear power plants until today have developed a long-lasting solution for dealing with these rods. And they are mainly, or most of the times, they are stored firstly for 10 to 20 years in water balls to cool them down first, and then they are being stored in concrete tanks. But that does not mean these solutions are permanent. It's very far away from being permanent. In both of these processes, where when they are kept at water balls, firstly, they should be supervised by humans, and even after they are they are moved to the concrete tanks, they should be supervised by human, because any cracks in the tanks or any failure of the water system can have major disasters or major accidents, as happened in Fukushima, for example. So until long-term or long-lasting solution is developed for the disposal of these uranium and radioactive nuclear waste, nuclear energy should be thought of twice and very carefully. Now, AJ will continue with the rest of the disadvantages of the nuclear energy.
Now, let's discuss risk of shutdown reactors. Shutdowns are often initiated due to concerns about nuclear power. Phase-outs usually include shutting down nuclear power plants and looking towards fossil fuels and renewable energy. When a power company decides to close nuclear power plant permanently, the facility must be decommissioned by safely removing it from service and reducing residual radioactivity to a level that permits the release of property and termination of the operating license. The retirement process for a nuclear power plant involves disposing of nuclear waste and decontaminating equipment and facilities to reduce the residual radioactivity, making it much more expensive and time-consuming than retiring other power plants. When a reactor shuts down, utilities often end up replacing the lost electricity by burning more coal or natural gas, according to the analysis made by U.S. Energy Information Administration. France derives about 70% of its electricity from nuclear energy due to a long-standing policy based on energy security. Government policy is set to reduce this to 50% by 2035, which means there will be a lot of reactor shutdowns in France. According to Rubiem research, when a large and unstable reactor is shut down, facilities cannot be moved, and they take up precious land space and have the potential to contaminate surrounding areas. Reclamation of land releases as much greenhouse emissions as the operation of the plant in the nuclear plant life cycle. As an economical aspect to be considered, high initial costs are a disadvantage. Companies that are planning new nuclear units are currently indicating that total initial costs are between $6 billion and $9 billion for each 1,100 megawatt plant. Nuclear power plants are expensive to build, but relatively cheap to run. This is because nuclear power plants are technically complex and must satisfy strict licensing and design requirements. The design and construction of a new nuclear power plant requires many highly qualified specialists and often takes many years, compounding financial costs, which may become significant. Building a new nuclear plant is a huge investment, especially for developing countries. That being said, the nuclear option may not be viable for the majority of countries on the planet because of this. Into history, there have been 7 major accidents in reactors and facilities dealing with nuclear waste. 3 of those were mostly contained, but 4 of those released significant amounts of radioactivity into the environment. Large areas of Russia, Ukraine, and Japan were rendered unfit for the human habitation for decades to come. The number of deaths is highly disputed, but probably lies in the thousands. All of these disasters happened with nuclear reactors that have very different types, in very different countries and several decades apart. Looking at these numbers, we may ask ourselves, would 10% of the world's energy supply be worth a devastating disaster every 30 years? Would 30% of it be worth another Fukushima or Chernobyl somewhere on Earth every 10 years? How much more should we lose until we draw the line and say no more to this? Now, our friends Omar and Mehmet will discuss advantages of nuclear energy.
Okay, so now that we've discussed some of the disadvantages of nuclear energy, let's discuss some of their advantages. Firstly, nuclear energy has one of its most prominent advantages in the fact that it works almost completely greenhouse gas free compared to other forms of energy sources. Also, for the most part, nuclear energy is one of the least toxic and impactful energy generation methods, accounting for some of the lowest indicators according to many environmental assessment studies. Another major advantage on nuclear energy is how firm it is. This is not an exact advantage per se, rather is a lacking of the other energy generation methods. One of the most important issues with most of the other clean and renewable energies is how inconsistent and affected they are by external factors. Where solar or wind energies might be affected by the amount of sunlight or wind that they have access to, nuclear has an advantage in the sense of it using a solid fuel source, making its energy rather firm. This is leaving alone the fact that they could be used whenever they're needed and for decades on end.
Let's continue with the next advantage, which is lower electricity generation cost. To be able to see the economical performance of nuclear energy, we check the levelized cost of energy, which means that minimum price to sell electricity without loss after counting all expenses such as operating, building, maintaining, and fuel costs. You can see some levelized cost of energy values for different technologies, and it is obvious that nuclear is the lowest one. So we can say that even if it has a high capital cost, nuclear is better in terms of economy. Let's move on to next advantage, which is less input requirements. To be able to produce 1 megawatt of electricity, we require 1.3 grams of uranium. In other technologies, we require 500 kilograms of coal, 300 liters of oil, and 200 meter cubes of natural gas. Therefore, we can say that we extract less resource from Earth, we pay less transformation costs as energy is compacted, and we produce less amount of waste in terms of quantity by using nuclear energy. Let's move on to the next and last advantage of nuclear energy, which is health benefits. To be able to assess health benefits, we use the health assessment, and we use some indicators such as disability adjusted life years, which represents the loss of the equivalent of 1 year of full health. We also use years of life loss and total fatalities, and results show that in normal conditions, nuclear and renewable energies have less risk than fossil fuel. Also, in normal conditions, nuclear has less risk than renewable energy in terms of health. In case of accident, nuclear has still less risk than renewable energy if the International Atomic Energy Agency nuclear level is 4 or below. From this point, my friend Omar will continue.
Now, I'm going to address one of the most important aspects whilst considering nuclear energy as an alternative energy source, which is social issues. Generally, populations don't really care about where their energy comes from and how is it produced. Rather, they care about whether is it cheap, secure, and might put some thought into whether is it clean or not, but that would be as far as they might care. However, nuclear energy does not come without its risks, no matter how small they might be. Therefore, proper education of the general populace is important, and the explanation of the possible risks should be carried out accordingly. Furthermore, the proper management of nuclear power plants should be kept as the #1 priority if nuclear energy was to be chosen. This is because the general population doesn't really care about the source of their energy as long as no nuclear incidents were to happen. When in that case, the public outcry might be very loud and might result in the permanent shutdown of entire energy generating sectors. And for these reasons, complete and proper education should be carried out with complete transparency and compliance to the safety and ethical rules. Otherwise, both the general public and the people in charge would be fooled into making irrational, out of place, and unnecessary decisions that no one would benefit from. And now, Mehmet will give us a general overview of the perspective of nuclear energy, both for Turkey and on an international level.
Let's talk about Turkey's energy strategy. Turkey is a developing country and its population is increasing. Therefore, its energy demand is more than global average. They use mainly fossil fuels, but they don't have these fossil fuels as natural source, so they have to import them. Since Turkey import, it creates economic stress. Also, as a developing country, Turkey desires a rapid and consistent energy. Therefore, Turkey decided to go nuclear and construct nuclear power plants. There is one nuclear power plant under construction, which is Akkuyu. It will start at 2023, and it is expected that it will produce 10% of Turkey's electricity. There are also 2 nuclear power plants at planning step, which are Sinop and ENVE. When we want to talk about global energy strategy, it gets complicated. It's important. It is impossible to say that there is a single strategy because requirements and presidencies of countries can change. The points such as social aspects, political situations, economical conditions, geopolitical locations can differ from country to country. That means that the energy source selection can differ from country to country. For example, Germany decided to go renewable and shut off nuclear energy. They can easily do that because they have a lot of neighbors and they can import energy in case of shortage. However, Japan can't do it because it's an island country, so they have to be self-sufficient in this manner. Therefore, they decided to go nuclear.
So this brings us to the end of our presentation of our case study regarding nuclear energy. We firstly discussed some of the advantages and disadvantages of nuclear energy in a general way, and then our friend Omar discussed some of the social aspects that are related to the nuclear energy strategies and power plants building, etc. And then our friend Mehmet finally concluded with some of the feasibility or reliability highlights of nuclear energy or nuclear power plants in some countries and worldwide in general. And then he discussed the Turkish strategy plan in specific. So that's the end of our presentation. Here is our reference list, and thank you for your listening.